Thank you all for being here, those of you here and online. Does anyone have any questions after the reading? Charles?
What do you mean by neurodivergent?
Good question. Starting us off strong. Neurodivergent. It's a big word, and I'm hoping that after today you'll understand more about the concept. And I think for you to get the concept, you have to understand a little bit about my story. My first class in college, I wanted to be a counselor, was a psychology class, and I failed out of my psychology class. So, learning that I couldn't really do well in college, at least that's what I believed, I took off and was a flight attendant, had a blast flying around the world. I fit in really well, got hurt in turbulence, and a few years later, they were going to pay for me to go back to college, but I knew I couldn't go back and I didn't do well. Now I know in a traditional setting. So I went to a college meant for diverse learners, for people who were neurodivergent. That term wasn't being used at the time. So what does neurodivergent mean and why did I succeed in that setting? So I don't know how to describe it and for me to understand it in a textbook, but when I describe it like this to my clients and my students, it seems to make a little bit more sense. There's not just two types, but if we're talking on a spectrum, in a situation, a neurotypical, meaning someone who has a typical or an expected response to a cue, would act or respond in a way that we could predict. So, for example, if I have a quarter, you know those Runts candy jars? If I have a quarter and I put a quarter into those Runts jars and then I lift up the little metal lid, I expect Runts, those little bananas, apples, all those to come out in my hand. And a neurotypical person, that you just say something or do something or act around a neurotypical person, and there's usually a predicted response. A neurodiverse learner, or someone who's neurodiverse, if I put in the quarter, out pops a shoe, and the rest of the world is looking around like, why is there a shoe? The person who has the shoe is like, why do I have a shoe? It looks like there's an obvious progression from the Runts to the metal output. And everyone says, well, just do it. Just put the quarter in and it's going to come out right. So you put a quarter in and now pops a Dorito. Neurodiverse, it doesn't mean you're bad. It just means the wiring works different in our brains. Our brains are a processing center. So neurotypical has a typical way, an expectation that the majority of the population will have a predictable pattern when there's a cue. So how does that happen? It's just the way that the brain works. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but the difference between neurotypical and neurodiverse is just the patterns are different. The responses are different to cues. An example might be, for my example, I grew up in a home where there was some fear. There was a little bit of fear of power, fear of discipline. And so I learned to adapt no matter what to any given situation, even if I didn't understand the situation. And then I also had a few episodes of trauma in my early years. So I isolated, and I also, anytime I came out and was with any social environment, I had a fear of what someone else was thinking of me, or potential harm, or control, or punishment. So a neurotypical person who hadn't had some of those same experiences, if somebody were to say to a neurotypical person, wow, you look beautiful today, they might respond, or the expected response is, thank you. And then they would move on, or like, oh, thank you very much. For me, my response in my head, at least, was, what do they mean by that? Did they mean that I didn't do well today? Was that sarcastic? Were they telling me this shirt's ugly? Is the shirt ugly? Am I supposed to do anything? Am I supposed to say thank you? What am I supposed to say? Neurotypical people have this whole different way of their brains working, and it can be for any reason: trauma, ADHD. It could be on the spectrum, any sort of behavioral issues. There are so many different reasons why someone might be neurodiverse, but understanding the difference between neurotypical and neurodiverse helps us understand that the individual that has a non-neurotypical response to a cue is not someone to shame, demean, or for them to call themselves a disaster or an egotistical maniac or any of those things. I promote coming at our brains and our bodies and the way that we interact with the world around us with curiosity and wonder, because if we don't, we are not setting ourselves up for any type of change in behavior, attitudes, anything. Any other questions? That's a good question. Okay, so what's the difference between adaptive and maladaptive? Kurt, thank you so much for asking. Adaptive and maladaptive are great ways of just saying how you changed. If I am a child and someone is, like my parents are yelling in my household, an adaptive behavior is that I go into my room. Maladaptive behavior is I go drink their vodka, for example. That's just in the moment, the difference between adaptive and maladaptive. But we as humans are not that simple. I love using the example of if you're 10, my son had a leg that was a little bit longer than another. So he had an insert put in. So if you're 10 years old and you have one leg that's 2 inches longer than the other leg, and you go to the doctor and they give you a shoe insert. So you wear the shoe insert, and that's what helps you walk, look, feel like every other person around you with two legs, and you just look like everyone else. However, when you get home, when you're getting out of bed, going into the shower, anything, you don't have the insert in, and so you learn to walk differently in order to balance, otherwise you fall over. So at 10 years old, you figure out adaptive ways to walk with your two legs being in different heights. What happens as humans is our environments change, our physiology changes, the people around us change, our decisions and choices and education change. So in this example, if you become 20 and now your legs are the same, but you've never taken the insert out, that adaptive change, that adaptive thing that you did at 10 now is not serving you well. So now you're walking strangely and everyone around you is like, just take out the insert. Well, when you take out the insert, your whole body, your hips, your bones, your structure has changed. So now you're falling over when you don't have the insert in. So everyone around you is saying like, what's wrong with you? You alone are saying what's wrong with yourself. And then when you go to ask somebody for help, they just say, you just walk with two legs. So adaptive and maladaptive, if we're just speaking in a specific moment, that's what we see as humans. You come to me and you see me doing a drug and you think, wow, that's a horrible person. I can't believe that she would do that to herself and her kids. I don't do drugs. I'm not saying that as an actual example, but that would be what you would think if that's what I did. However, you don't know the whole history of how that change happened. And often, I almost want to think always, there's something in our past and our humanity that has made it so that we take something that was an original adaptation to something that was challenging, traumatic, an environment inside, outside, external, internal around us. And then as time moved on, it ended up becoming a maladaptive action, thought, behavior that we do in our everyday lives. So adaptive, maladaptive, hopefully that helped. Any other questions? Oh, come on, you guys. Charles, you always have something for me. Amygdala? Okay. What's the purpose of the amygdala? Yeah? I have a hard time talking about the amygdala without talking about the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. So the amygdala is a part of our brain that we don't see, we don't feel it happen. We have no idea that it's doing its work. Yes. Hippocampus, hypothalamus, and amygdala. So the brain, our functions, we don't see what's happening. So we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes unless we really dial into our own bodies and our own brains. The amygdala is the initiator of those responses when we feel anything that is out of the norm. In the old times, people say, like, if there's a lion or something, that initial response of, like, there's something scary, there's something out of my control, I feel fear, or there's something that I need to do, adjust, the amygdala will send out responses in your body. So you don't need to know the word amygdala. Just right now, know that you have this response in your body. So for me, I know that my fingertips start to tingle. I also flush. If it's something that is really getting to me, my stomach turns and I get sick to my stomach. So those show me that I have different hormones flooding my body, and then I end up doing one of the F's, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, potentially do something sexual to someone else or something to get attention. That is one way that we adapt. And then now we're saying also focus, like a hyper-focus action, which could be escape, but it's becoming more like I'm going to focus on something like Facebook Reels or a video game so that I can abandon the world around me. because of some kind of fear reaction or response. So the amygdala floods with that, and then your hippocampus is fantastic. It's going to shoot all those memories in the past in your brain of how you're going to get out of that mode. Run, if you ran before and that worked, that works, and so it's gonna tell you to run. Or if you your parents again fight, and you know that if you go into your bedroom and hide, flight. So that's your response that you're going to get. If you freeze, you know that with your parents fighting that it works. If you just shut down your facial expression, take whatever they yell at you for, and that works, then your brain is going to tell you to do those things. One that's been huge, that is huge in our population, is alcohol. Alcohol becomes available legally at 21, but if you are in a stressful situation, you have a little bit of alcohol. It calms we'll talk about the hypothalamus in just a minute, but it calms the cortisol and those other stress hormones in your body. Your brain's going to flash that toxin into your mind of like, this helps, this helps. And a lot of people need more and more as they go. This is an addiction thing that we'll talk about later at some given point. But that's really what the hippocampus is supposed to do. It's supposed to be helpful as we get older, and we end up with those maladaptive behaviors, that knowing that the hippocampus is going to tell you, go have alcohol, go have alcohol, go have alcohol. You got the cognitive part of your brain saying, no, it doesn't work anymore. This is just one example of many. Drugs, overeating, over shopping. There are so many things that we do as humans that's a learned behavior that worked at once, became a maladaptive behavior because of how this whole brain system happens. And you can't not have a response from the amygdala. You can't talk to your brain and just be like, amygdala, don't send out any hormones. And then the hypothalamus. Once we start harnessing the ability to understand our brain and how it works, I've been really working on when I feel my fingertips tingling, I know that something's going on. And then we start processing through and doing the work to have habit change and to have a more knowledgeable understanding of how our brain and our body and our spirit and our mind interact. We end up learning how to have change. It takes a lot of work, but we can't just stop the hippocampus from throwing out those memories, and we can't stop the amygdala from putting those stress hormones or the flight, freeze hormones, and then that cortisol that the hypothalamus puts in our system so that we have that ability to be on heightened alert, but your body is going to need to get rid of that cortisol, and so it's going to find a way. Your hippocampus is going to keep flashing those memories, and that's how that all entwines. And so if you're living life on a day-to-day basis in that arena, and then you want to go just get a gym membership on January 1st or start a new food program, it's not going to change. You're not going to be able to change it. Everyone is like, on day 10, why am I going back? What's happening? Well, your brain, body, everything that is happening in you has been happening for a long, long time. And it's subconscious and it's natural, and you can't see it. You can't go to a surgeon to remove it. You can't go to a therapist to just change the rewiring, because no other therapist has been in your brain. They don't know how that whole system works. I have fingertips that tingle. I have a client that I work with and her ears burn. I have a gentleman that I work with, and he says that he just feels his heart start racing, like he wants to go run. And this is what our brains and bodies tell us. And it's such an incredible thing when we can embrace our present to empower our future. If we're calling ourselves idiots, if we're calling ourselves morons, if we're saying like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I did it again, and we're shaming ourselves, then we are just putting ourselves backwards and more backwards from making progress towards the future. We're thinking about the past, we're fearing for the future, we're not being present. But when we can realize, like, wait, my brain is doing what it's supposed to be doing, that's when we can dig into the work. That's when we can make positive changes. That's when we can make a difference. Yes. So Emily, thank you for your question. Why is it so hard to change habits and addictions? That's exactly, it's an ingrained process. It's not hard. It just takes time and it takes energy. Every single one of you all have your journals. Every single one of you have your journals. We have to make change every single day, and it's little steps. So it takes one moment at a time, one gratitude list at a time. Working with the coach. Coach is only going to be from here forward. Working with a therapist, if you've got some of those CPSD, trauma therapy, if you've got anything that's cognitive that you can't change. There's some of us, I'm ADHD. I did a lot of therapy. I realized that I do have CPTSD in my past, and I worked through a lot of those traumas that can present as ADHD. But at the end, it's always a process. But going through that, I have definitely realized that I am ADHD and have some OCD in me too. So there's something that's not going to change. I do take medication for that. But along with medication, with a therapist and a doctor, and working with a coach, I have changed my life in the last couple of years, and I hope that I can be there for you too. Any other questions? Okay. Let's take the next 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:40. And if you'll just go through your gratitude list, we're starting a new year. Also, after your gratitude list, take your journals out that I asked you to bring from last year and just reflect on the first few days from last year and see if you see any changes, any additions, any similarities. And I look forward to getting back with you. And well, that's 10:36, so at 10:41.